this property in the countryside of Alabama. It's in the middle of nowhere with 60 plus acres. On the property sits the house, which is empty for the most part, a barn, and a greenhouse. The barn and the house are close to each other, and the greenhouse sits farther into the woods. Me and my friend were setting up our film equipment in the house because we were going to film a video the next day. We had to spend the night at the house for some odd reason I forget, and we didn't want to sleep in the truck, so we slept in the house. During the night, my friend wakes me up and tells me he's getting weird feelings about the house, so to ease his nerves, I agree to go sleep in the truck. Morning came, and my friend told me that during the night at around 4, he spotted 7 to 8 people lingering around the area. He said they were walking around the house and looked around the outside of it, probably to see if anyone was in there because they saw our equipment in my truck. One of the guys had been staring directly at my friend in the truck, but the windows were tinted, and that combined with the fact it was nighttime probably made it impossible for the guy to see my friend. Thankfully, the guy walked away from the truck and went back to his group. My friend tried waking me up, and I wouldn't. We went into the house to check on everything. Some lights were smashed, some papers burned, and my umbrella's broken. In one of the rooms, there were a bunch of burnt-out candles sitting around. We were both scared. The next few days we were filming our video, we found some decayed animals around the barn. 2 dogs, some cattle, birds, and a bat. I kind of brushed it off as the previous owners of the land leaving their animals to die or something. Weeks later, we came back to see if any more weird shit was going on. There were some more dead animals and a couple of wooden crosses in the ground by the tree line. My friend firmly believed that the people he saw in the house on our last visit were responsible for all this, and he thinks they might have been part of some satanic cult or other weird group. Areas of the ground around the crosses were burned as well. Me and my friend buried the animals in the woods and left. Another time we came back to ride dirt bikes and ATVs, and nothing else weird had happened. I went back to my truck to check on something, and my friend was moving the vehicles back into the barn where we stored them. My friend ran back to me and told me there was someone in the barn just lying in the hay as if he were relaxing in one of the horse stalls. We went back to check it out together, and the guy is still lying in the hay. I asked him if he was alright, and he said he was, and he told me to let him sleep. I don't really know why, but I just told him to be gone within the hour and left him, assuming he was a wandering hobo. My friend expressed his belief that the guy was part of the group responsible for all the weird activity. Another few weeks later, we returned, and right away as we pulled up to the house, we saw a group of 3 guys conversing by the house. One of them pointed at my truck, and they all ran into the woods. I grabbed my pistol, and me and my friend chased after them, as I had had enough of this bullshit. We searched in the woods a while, but had lost them. However, we decided to inspect the greenhouse because I kind of forgotten about it. As we looked, we kind of determined they must have lived in there because we found clothes, blankets, books, and some eaten remains of cooked squirrels. I guess that's what they had been living off of. There's a freshwater pond nearby, so I guess they got water from there. We went back to my truck and checked the house and the barn. In the barn, there was some weird altar set up with candles. We finally decided to call the police, which we probably should have done earlier, and they took down statements and searched the woods. They didn't find anything though, but we installed cameras all around the house, barn, woods, and greenhouse, and plan to review the footage next time we go back. I'll update if anything happens. I understand a lot of people are going to think this is fake, but I assure you it's nothing but the truth. This happened a few years ago when I was about 13. I'm 5'7" and about 125 pounds, so I'm pretty small, but I usually have pepper spray and a pocket knife on me. I'm embarrassed to say that in the excitement of exploration with my best friend, I forgot my pepper spray and knife. I love to explore and travel, especially in places I'm not allowed, so when I moved in, of course, one of the first places I explored was the train tracks. So I had my best friend come over one day to explore the neighborhood with me, and we decided the train tracks was a perfect place to explore. We were walking for an hour or two, but it was still light outside, and we had just passed a small neighborhood street, so we felt safe. But when I turned around to throw a stick, I saw 5 hooded figures following us from about 200 feet. I tried to pretend I didn't see them and told my best friend calmly. We decided to look at them straight on and see what they would do. Once we looked at them, they stopped, so did my friend and I. We stared at each other for a few seconds, but it felt like hours. Finally, they made their move. 3 of them went left and 2 of them went right. We heard the sound of loud and fast footsteps, so we finally snapped out of our trance and ran as fast as we could. We were both in cross country and we were being held together by adrenaline so we could run faster than we ever had before. Luckily, because I explored on those same tracks alone a few days ago, I knew if we ran half a mile more, we would be on a bridge above another small neighborhood. We somehow made it, no clue if we were still being followed or not, but out of fear we jumped 10 feet down and kept running deep into the neighborhood until we finally saw other people. Then we slowly walked home, shaking and exhausted. Looking back now, I regret not telling my parents, but I was scared they wouldn't let me explore alone anymore. But I didn't go on those train tracks again, and I never will. I grew up in Ohio in the 70s, and me and my childhood friend Joe were outside all the time we could manage it. Joe lived on a farm that bordered a pretty big forest, and my parents would drop me off in the morning and we'd stay in the woods all weekend. We'd only come out for school. We loved pretending we were frontiersmen. We'd build shelters, traps, practice making fire with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we got to be in high school, we got this notion to pull a Stand By Me. This was based on the movie of the same name that had just come out. The idea was that we'd walk the railroad tracks out in the country, but instead of looking for a dead body, we'd find cool bridges to fish from and camp a little ways off the tracks. And of course we knew this was dangerous and we'd likely be trespassing, but we were kids. We had a lot of fun. We did find beautiful rivers, we discovered bridges no one went to, we fished, and we hid from trains. At night we camped in the woods just near the tracks and made small hidden fires. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic. In fact, it was so fun we did it multiple times. Never had a problem. After high school, me and Joe went our own ways. We both left home, but always stayed in touch and always tried to coordinate visits so we'd see each other occasionally. Well, one summer in the mid-90s, it worked out that we were both in town for about a week. We'd do stuff with family in the day, and at night we'd either catch drinks at a bar or sit outside Joe's house around a fire and talk about the old days. One night, me and Joe got to talking about our Stand By Me trips. Well, nostalgia and beer are a hell of a mix. Soon we decided to take a day, walk the rails, camp one night, and walk home. The day came. We started out early in the morning. We had my wife drop us off in our old spot where we used to start, right outside our hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy and made sure to mention it. When she pulled away, Joe suggested that instead of walking the usual route, we'd take the opposite direction, just to be adventurous. We knew the land well, we had a map, so I gave a what the hell, and off we set. The day went fine. It was fun and a little sad, but in a good way. We found a bridge and sat on the edge, smoked a joint, and moved on. We had no fishing gear, but we brought some canned food and other stuff. Before night started to set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thick forested area, trees on every side of the train track, so you felt like you were in a tunnel. We had brought small hammocks to sleep on, but before we set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. Now this is what we used to do in the old days too. We'd walk the area around a little bit to make sure some dude's house wasn't just over the hill and we were actually camping in their yard. We walked maybe 100 or so feet into the woods and up a small incline. We figured if we didn't see anything from on top of the short hill, we'd be fine. But when we got to the top, we saw an old building down at the bottom, about 100 yards into the woods. It was barely visible. We pondered over what to do. We both assumed it was a sugar shack or something because there didn't appear to be a clear road into it. From where we were, there didn't look to be anyone in it either. All was quiet, no movement could be seen, no lights. We decided to walk a little closer just to make sure. We came down the hill very slowly, and as we neared the building, we saw it wasn't a sugar shack at all. It was an old church. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was a squat, sagging building whose wood and plank were almost black from the years of moss and rot. A cross still stood on top of the place, also weathered black. None of the windows had glass, and there were no doors, just open doorways. We got close enough to see inside. There were rows of pews in a built-up section in front for a preacher to stand. We didn't go all the way in, we didn't want to. Beyond all that, there was no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no paths, no roads. It was just an abandoned church. We left immediately and went back up the hill to our spot we had picked to camp. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel a little better, but we were still a little uneasy. We chalked it up to the natural creepiness seeing a church in the middle of the woods would elicit. Besides, at this point it was dusk and we just decided to rig up our hammocks and go to sleep and move on at early morning. Night set in, and as we lay in our hammocks and shot the shit, we began to hear something in the direction of the church. Our conversation about it went a little like this. "Do you hear that?" "What the fuck is that? It sounds like people singing." And it did sound just like singing. We both slid right out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two, and the singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Finally, we decided to creep back up the hill and see if we could spy where the sound was coming from. We could still move very quietly in the woods from the old days. It was second nature to us. The moon was barely out, but it provided enough light so you wouldn't walk right into a tree, but it was near pitch black. We didn't use flashlights as we crept slowly up the hill, and we didn't talk. When we got to the top, we saw a light in the distance. It was coming from the church, and the singing was coming from inside. Joe and I put our heads close together and had a hushed conversation that boiled down to, "Can you believe this shit?" The light looked to be candlelight from the way it flickered, and though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music, but in another language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was in there, but we only saw occasional shadows. We had no intention of getting closer either. We had about a football field length between us, and we aimed to keep it that way. The singing continued for a bit, and then it stopped. After that, a booming male voice began to chant. I was already freaked out, but this voice thoroughly scared the shit out of me. It sounded like some Old Testament preacher you see in movies, but again, it was like he was speaking in a different language because we couldn't understand a single word. Eventually it got to where a single male voice would say something, and then a bunch of voices would answer in song. This lasted for a while, and then they all broke into this long, sustained wail that just kept getting louder. It got so loud and so disturbing that I covered my ears, and it stopped. At this point, I was getting ready to say, "Let's get the fuck out of here," when Joe put a hand on my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out." We were far enough away that we couldn't make them out really well, but what we could see was a line of figures walk out the open doorway, all holding hands in single file. We could see some of them had flashlights. They began to sing again, and the light from the flashlights began to move towards us in the hill. We booked it back down to our campsite, grabbed our shit, and ran up to the tracks. Once there, we ran down the tracks in the direction we had come from. After a few minutes, we stopped and looked back. We saw lights coming down the hill. They were moving erratically, like whoever was holding them was shaking them. We continued to run in spurts and walk as fast as we could. We eventually stopped seeing the lights and came to a road. By our map, we knew a small town was about 15 minutes down it, and we walked there, got to a 24-hour gas station, and called my wife to come and get us. My wife and other friends all just thought it was kids messing around, but I heard those voices, and they sure as hell didn't sound like kids to me. Not sure who those people were, but it was definitely the creepiest thing that has happened to me out in the woods.